She's cheating on us. At my kitchen table sat a rather somber group of people. My three wives, Amber, Kathy, and Heather, and their two husbands, Mark and Jeff. The only one missing was our second wife, Claire. She was also my legal wife. If that sounds complicated, that's because it was. Polyamory wasn't as shady as it used to be, but we were still very careful. Careers could be ruined, family relationships strained or broken because they couldn't or wouldn't understand. That's why we were so careful. And if one of us got involved with someone outside the group, it could damage the infrastructure to the point of total breakdown. We had rules. One of the main ones was that if you wanted to bring someone else into the group, they had to be thoroughly vetted, and the rest of us had to make sure they were a good fit. And you absolutely, under no circumstances, did not, under any circumstances, do anything with anyone outside the group. All sorts of considerations had to be taken into account, one of the main ones being the health of the group. Since we all slept with each other in one combination or another, if one got infected with something, sooner or later everyone got infected. Our marriage didn't start out that way. Claire and I were married for about a year before she started talking about the polyamorous lifestyle. She would leave articles at her place, and one day I came home and saw a copy of The Ethical Whore on the coffee table. I read it. The woman spoke intelligently and lucidly about the merits of this lifestyle. Then Mark, Heather, Jeff, and Katie started to come around. Not that Claire insisted on it, but she hinted rather insistently. Still, it took almost 2 years before they wore me down. I went into it with a promise to Claire that any time I said stop, it would be over and we would return to monogamy. Jeff and Mark were bi, as were Katie and Claire. Amber and Heather were straight, as was I, although I think Heather was considering it. Amber lived with us, Kathy lived with Jeff, and Mark lived with Heather. It was all mostly for appearances. Bed partners changed weekly. Sometimes it was Amber in my bed, sometimes Heather, occasionally Kathy, and of course my wife Claire. Now I highly doubted she could come back. In some respects, it was a very good thing. If you wanted something done, you knew who to call. Amber and I loved being outdoors, and we made sure to get out and camp at least 3 times a year. She also loved kayaking and fishing. We introduced Mark to fishing, but he decided he liked fly fishing best, while Amber and I caught whatever we could get our hands on. He and Mark even hunted, but that was enough for me as a youngster. I still enjoyed going to the range to shoot skeet and targets, though. Amber wouldn't stop talking about skeet shooting, and most of the others tried it too. Now it was Amber, Mark, Heather, and me. They even bought their own shotguns. 2 28-gauge over-ander for the ladies, my 1100 pump action, and Mark bought a very ornate double-barreled 20-gauge with rabbit ear hammers. Rabbit ear hammers. The guns were kept at my house. Heather was the most urbane. She knew where the trendy restaurants were, where the latest gallery opened, and whatever was trendy at that second. If you wanted a black tie night out, Heather was your girl. Jeff loved woodworking and exhibitions. I think his lose card was adorned with a gold ribbon. I had the largest house and lot, thanks to my late grandmother, and I gave him the use of one shed for his hobby and storage of his tools. This man had a lot of tools. I helped him from time to time if a heavy load needed to be lifted. He built my dining room set, a bedroom set for the guest room in my house, and a huge closet for Amber. I tried several times to talk him into the business, but he wasn't sure he could make a living and wouldn't do it. My wife was not an adventurous person, unless it was somewhere in the tropics and involved a 5-star resort. Then she was totally fine with it. Last year, we went on vacation as a group to one of those resorts where clothing was not required and had a good time. There were a few unpleasant moments. Claire got a little tipsy and flirted with a stranger so much that he was sure she was going to spend the night in his hotel room. He was a little annoyed when the group swooped in and drove her back to the villa. She was hungover and apologized. I hadn't spoken to her for a while, and the other ladies gave her hell. You almost screwed up last night, girl. It took you 2 years to talk your husband into it, and you almost ruined everything. If you want weird, find it. But if you do, and we find out, you're out. No second chances. And as angry as we are, you better think about your husband. He'll dump you in a minute, and the group will be gone, so we're interested in your behavior. Don't spoil a good thing. Amen. She must have seen the writing on the wall and stayed exclusively with me for the rest of the trip. She apologized. I clarified my position, and we put it behind us, I thought. Now it seems like we didn't. The guy wanted to object, but Mark is 6'3". He's a gym junkie, and Jeff has his own hobby muscles. It's unlikely either of them had ever fought anyone in their lives. I, on the other hand, was a wild child who knew that when you fight, the only rule is to win. My height was 170 centimeters, and I wasn't fat. He kind of ignored them, but he recognized something about me and backed off. I carried Claire into the room and threw her on the bed. She passed out a few minutes later. I barely spoke to her for most of the next day, and the girls hounded her for getting drunk and doing something stupid. She never apologized to me, but tried to show me she was remorseful. I don't think she had more than 2 drinks at a time for the rest of the vacation. And now Heather thought she was cheating. How sure are you? She looked at me sadly. Not 100%, but pretty close. She disappeared for a couple of girls' nights out. Then she started skipping work, taking long lunches here, leaving a couple hours early there. I checked and she wasn't with any of us. Did you notice anything? Not really. But then again, she's not here that often or with any of us for long periods of time, so it could have been pretty easy for her. Jeff asked what I wanted to do. Remember the last time she pulled that crap? She didn't go all the way and have fun with it, but that was because we found out about it early enough. I think I'm going to call some friends who do stakeouts. I'll tell you what, if she's having fun with someone on the side, I'll leave her, which means I'll leave the group. You were her friends long before she was with me, and I don't want to ruin that dynamic. Besides, the lifestyle is starting to get me down. Either way, I would have left a long time ago. This shocked them into silence. They had been urging me to try it for a long time, and I personally thought I was a fool for agreeing. I was desperately afraid that I would lose her, and I thought that if we experimented a little, she would get tired of it, and it would be just the 2 of us again. I wanted to start a family, and she wasn't keen on the idea. Maybe it was time to call it a day. Don't do anything rash, Jake. We don't know anything yet. Her physical infidelity doesn't really matter much. Why haven't either of you had children yet? There was an awkward silence before Heather spoke. We made a pact. Neither of us were going to have children until we were 30. That made it easy. Today, I want each of you to look me in the eye and tell me why this didn't come up in conversation when you were trying to talk me into it. Did any of you ask me what I thought about waiting at least 4 more years before starting a family? The silence dragged on before Jeff began. We were afraid it would prevent you from accepting our lifestyle. Besides, Claire told us she finally told you and you were fine with it. Once again, Claire lied to the group. A strange thought crossed my mind and I decided to ask. Tell me something. When you girls decided it was time to have kids, were you going to have them with your spouse, or did you just get lucky? There was a very long, very awkward silence that did me no good at all. Finally, Heather spoke up. We girls discussed it and decided that the first one would be with our husbands. Then we thought we could share to bring us closer together. They all sort of froze in anticipation of the explosion, and I didn't disappoint them. Screw you, damn it! Get out! Right now! Heather and Katie were already halfway to the door. Mark pretended like he wanted to say something, but hesitated. I always liked Jeff better, and he thought I'd be nicer to him. Jake, calm down. I didn't realize you weren't on board with the plan. I don't think Mark was, and I know I wasn't, but from the looks on their faces, the girls knew. We'll leave now and come back when you've calmed down. Yeah, I don't think so. Don't come over. Don't call me. If I want to, I'll call you. I'll be staying at my house this weekend alone. Tell Claire to go ahead. I know she's supposed to be with Mark this week. When she hauls her ass in, let her know the situation has changed. If she comes back to me, she comes back to me. No one else. Make sure she understands. And make sure she understands that it's not written in stone. A few sighs sounded. I guess it hadn't gone at all the way they'd planned. I was ready to give up that lifestyle as it was. Everyone has to live according to their moral compass, and mine was pointing less and less toward the life I was living. Amber didn't leave, but made sure to stay out of sight. I grabbed a couple ciders, walked back to the bench under the pecan tree, and sat down. I was still there when it got dark, and Amber opened the kitchen door, spilling light into the backyard. Jake? Are you still in there? I made dinner, honey. Please come in and eat. Amber was the youngest. She was 22, while most were 28 or 29. She was just as cute as everyone else, but she didn't graduate high school the best. In fact, she didn't graduate from high school at all. When I found this out, I gave her no choice and put her in an adult school. I didn't want her to have a high school diploma. I felt it was important for her to get a real education. I coached and mentored her, and the rest of the group helped her. She became valedictorian of her class and thanked me by name in her speech. Her diploma hung in a frame that Jeff had made for her out of cherry wood. I decided I was hungry, so we ate in silence. When I finished, I thanked her for the food and asked her one question. You're the only one who isn't married in our group. Where did you enter the paternity lottery? She lowered her eyes for a second and then gave me the look of innocence I loved so much about her. I was only going to have one child. Yours. I knew that no matter what happened, whether the group stayed together or not, whether you and Claire stayed together, you would never abandon your child. Or her mother. Why me? Because you're the best of us, Jake. You're the one who takes care of everyone. All the other girls told me when we had our bachelorette party that after the first child with their husbands, you'd be the next. You know that if I sleep with any of them again, it's only under protection, right? A tear trickled down her cheek. That's what I thought. Let me tell you this. If you and I end up in the same bed again, you don't have to worry. I will never try to lure you into a trap like that. Never. Do you understand? Well, while we're on the subject of truthful confessions, I think you're the best of us. You never say a bad word about anyone, and even though you're the youngest, you're the mother of the group. That tells me that when you have a child, he or she will never have to worry about being taken care of by a mother. You'll be a saber-tooth among kittens when it comes to your kids. She smiled the first time, but then grew serious. If you're the father figure and I'm the mother figure, we have to decide what to do with these unruly children. I smiled back. Personally, I'm in favor of kicking them out of the nest and seeing if they can fly on their own. I'm serious about doing away with the group. I'm tired of having everything I need and nothing. I don't think that's a lifestyle I'd like anymore. Good night, Amber. I left her at the table as a tear rolled down her cheek. Around midnight, I felt her slide into my bed. This may be the last time I share this bed with you, darling. Why don't you just hold me for a while? She fell asleep snuggled against me, and I lay there wishing I had met her first. Then I smiled. When Claire and I got married, she was 16 years old. I woke up to someone rattling around in the kitchen. Amber was still in my arms, so it could only be one person. It was her week with Mark. Why would she be here? I knew the answer as soon as I asked myself that question. She was here for damage control. I wondered what she would think when she discovered I was gone. I got dressed and walked down the back stairs of the old farmhouse as quietly as possible, opened the door, and quietly stepped out. Old houses required a lot of maintenance, and I never could stand creaky doors, so I kept them greased and in good working order. I took my motorcycle, an old Triumph that Mark had helped me restore, and drove it down the long driveway, starting it up as I pulled onto the highway. After driving farther out, I decided to go for a boat ride and maybe do a little fishing. We all bought a big pontoon boat together. Lugging it back and forth wasn't very practical, so we rented a spot at a local marina. I filled the tanks, checked the fishing gear to make sure nothing was needed, bought fresh bait, restocked the fridge, and set sail. I was going to head to the headwaters of the lake. There were never many people there, which surprised me because the fishing was very good there. We usually kept the fish until we had enough to fry, but even though they were biting, this day I decided to catch and release. I stayed on the water until noon, then headed back out, and the first person I saw when I got back to the dock was Claire. She was smiling but looked scared as she tried to hug me. Don't. What? Don't touch me right now. But you're my husband. I'm supposed to touch you. The laugh was short and bitter. Aya? Really? Or am I just another buddy in your string of buddies with privileges? I'm really tired of this lifestyle, and I need to think about it. In the meantime, the best thing you can do is give me enough space to make a decision. Please. Yes, it worked. Instead of giving me space, she piled her whole body on top of me. Crying and pleading didn't seem to help, and I just stood there with my arms at my sides until she finally stopped. When she finally backed off, she uttered the classic phrase. We need to talk. About what? How much entertainment do you need to feel fulfilled? Obviously, you don't get enough at home, or with Jeff, or with Mark. Wait, maybe it's the girl you slept with. That never occurred to me, but it's entirely possible. She gasped. I'd never talked to her so bluntly and cared so little about her feelings. Plus, she was starting to get nervous. There were people around. Please, Jake, let's go home and talk. I'll explain everything when we get there. I surprised her by agreeing and got on my bike, but instead of turning right and following her, I turned left and unlocked the bike. When she turned around, I was already out of sight and could have turned onto any road, so she went home to wait. I rode for 2 hours and ended up in front of my great-uncle's house. He was already in his 70s, but he was still quite witty and always gave sound advice. He came to the door, grinned when he saw me, invited me in, grabbed a couple beers and went out onto the back terrace. We talked in generalities for a bit, and then I confessed that I was having marriage problems. I didn't initiate him into our lifestyle, but I told him that I thought she was cheating on me. He thought for a moment. You need to find out. If it is, try to find out if it was a random act or a planned action. That will help sort things out. Sometimes people make bad decisions in a fit of emotion and regret what they did. And sometimes people make deliberate decisions and take risks. You need to find out if there was an affair, if it is still going on, and if the cheater feels remorse when you confront them. The trick is to find out if he regrets having the affair, or if he's just sorry he got caught. When did you get to be so smart? He grinned. With age comes wisdom. That and years of experience. I'm glad you're old enough to realize that. We sat in silence for a few more minutes before he spoke again. You know, before I married your Aunt Clara, I was married to someone else. She was hitting on 2 different men when I caught her and kicked her to the curb. Not because I didn't love her, but because what she did was premeditated. It was all planned. I was single for 4 years before I met Clara. I thought the sun and moon rose and set because of her. And then she cheated. That shook me. Clara was the most loving and honest woman I'd ever met. He continued. I suppose, given my history, you're wondering why we stayed together. It was a drunken one-time mistake. One day when I wasn't home, she went to a bar with her sister for a drink. Her sister stayed. They continued drinking, and she ended up in the backseat of some jerk's car. I can't imagine the pain she had to go through to tell me about it, but she did. She left and went back to her mother's house. We were separated for 5 months before we got back together. Like I said, it was one time, she was drunk and told me as soon as I got home. It was hard for a while, but she never drank another drop of alcohol. She never spoke to her sister again. I guess it was her hobby to take her friends out on dates and get them to the point where they ended up in the backseat of someone's car. About a month after this incident, 3 women jumped on her and beat the crap out of her. When she healed, she wasn't as beautiful as she used to be. After she healed, she left, and no one knows where she ended up. I thanked him for the beer and conversation and headed home. Next chapter. I wasn't too surprised to see all the cars in the driveway. She must have put out an all-hands-on-deck alert. I wasn't in the mood, and then I realized I never would be, so I decided now was as good a time as any. The only one who made eye contact with me was Amber. She smiled sadly at me and made coffee. Heather decided to start. Jake, we can stop there. The fact that you're here emphasizes the root of my problem. This was supposed to be a serious conversation between me and my wife, not me, her, and all her cronies. There was a collective sigh. Kathy looked indignant. You don't have to be so rude, you know. We're not just buddies. We're much more than that. We're companions, lovers. We help each other. That's the whole point. You're there for each other. No one exists just for their mate. Face it, you're all doing this because you're afraid of being alone. You have no solid footing. It's just shifting sand as you jump from one thing to another. I sighed. I know I have no right to judge you. After all, I was one of you. But I made a decision on the way here, and I realized it's something I've been coming to for a long time. I'm not happy, and I won't be happy until it's just me and one other person. Someone who can't run off to someone else if I get on her nerves. I think that's the part of a relationship, getting on each other's nerves, but you know you have to stay and deal with it. You can't say that. I looked at Claire. Claire, how many nights have you spent in our bed this month? Enough. Enough for who? Not to me. You've been home or in what should be your home 8 days this month, and today is the 27th. Even if you spent the rest of the month with me, that would only be 11. 11 out of 30. That's not marriage. Not for me, anyway. But we had a commitment. First of all, we had commitments to each other. Do you remember them? Maybe you standing in front of your friends and family with me and the preacher will serve as a wake-up call. We've had this discussion before. This type of marriage is outdated. It won't be years before marriages like ours become mainstream, and no one will judge them. Perhaps it will be. But even if it does become mainstream, it still comes down to choice. What happens if couples refuse this lifestyle? Will you force them to? You all know that will never happen. Maybe sometime in the future when dinosaurs like me become extinct. I suspect that will happen very, very soon. Heather voiced her opinion. We all love each other, Jake. I love you just as I love Mark and Jeff. It makes us stronger. Ever heard the expression divide and conquer? That's exactly what we do, sharing time with other people and overcoming none of the obstacles couples face. Have you ever thought, how I wish I was in my bed with my spouse tonight, as you lay with your lovers? And despite all the fanciful descriptions, that's exactly what we are. We are lovers. Deep down, we don't love each other, at least not in my understanding of love. Protests followed immediately. I just let them babble on until they ran out of steam. When they fell silent, I changed direction. Mark, Jeff, this is for you. If your wives came to you right now today and said they were tired and wanted to be exclusive again, would you be able to? I ask because you're a little different from me. Kathy, how about you? Would you be able to sleep exclusively with your husband and not dream of a woman's touch, knowing they would be rejected by you for the rest of your life? The silence dragged on until Mark finally spoke. But we don't need that. I'm happy with the way things are. Everyone gets what they want and everyone is happy. Heather looked like she was deep in thought. I seemed to be pulling things that she hadn't thought about before. I turned to Amber. Where are you at in all of this? I'm just a +1. I don't have my own dog in this fight. I got here because I was lonely and confused and you guys befriended me. I've been thinking about leaving for months now. I'd like to find a man who only wants me, maybe have kids. My clock isn't ticking, but I think motherhood would do me good. I think I was the only one who wasn't surprised. Amber was young, but she wasn't an idiot. None of this would have happened if your wife could keep her legs closed. Heather was right. I looked at Claire. She looked a little pale. What about it, darling? Have you been recruiting? If you lie and I find out, we'll never be husband and wife again. If you hope to stay with me, you'd better tell the truth. She faltered for a moment. It was nonsense. A silly affair that I thought wouldn't hurt anyone. I'll put an end to that affair. You had 3 men and 1 woman, and you still went on a quest? How many men do you need? It was Mark who spoke, and he looked very angry. You've exposed all of us. What happens if you pick up some nasty stuff and you have to reveal everyone you've slept with to the medical staff? It's a small town, and one of the reasons we're careful when we go out as a group. We can explain away anything anyone sees by the fact that it's just a bunch of old friends having a good time. If we showed up en masse for testing, how long do you think it would take for someone to start taking an interest? You've really messed this up. Needless to say, you need to stay home until we're sure we're not in any danger. Heather was a little pissed off as well. Why did you do it, Claire? We've been invested in each other for years and now it's in jeopardy. If the band breaks up, I'm taking this to your doorstep. Everyone fell silent, and I gave them a few minutes to gather their thoughts. Claire, you were right when you said this was the end of the affair. Not in what you've done now, but in general. This has been one big drawn-out affair. I like all of you, but I'm leaving. From now on, I will only sleep with my wife, and if she can't do the same, we'll break up. Please don't make this any harder than it has to be, guys. I don't judge your lifestyle, and I still want to be your friend. It's going to be up to you. It's just not for me anymore. There was nothing more to say. Everyone had left, even Amber, and she had made it clear that all she needed was to spend the night alone. Claire just sat there for a minute. Can you do that? She snapped out of her self-contemplative state and looked at me. Do what? Be monogamous. One partner for the rest of your life. No exceptions. I don't want to. Can't we? We can't. When we started this journey, I knew deep down that this is how it would end. But I tried because I truly loved you. But even with as many partners as you have, it wasn't enough. Oh, I'm sure you'll try and maybe you'll last a while longer, but the temptation will be too strong and you'll go back to your old habits. And just so you know, I'm not judging others, but I am judging you. You don't have one right bone in your body. I have a feeling you've been playing around since before we even joined the band. Let's save ourselves the hassle and just declare it's over. She had a hard time understanding what I was saying. For a minute, I thought she was hyperventilating, but she got her breathing under control. Claire spent the rest of the evening trying to talk me down, but by bedtime she realized I'd had enough. We didn't sleep together that night. She slept in Amber's room. I lay there trying to figure out how my life had gotten to this point until exhaustion made me fall asleep. The next morning, she was already up and making breakfast, and I started to help. Old habits are hard to give up, and that was comforting to me in a way. We ate in near silence, and she said she had some things to do and left right afterward. I found out later that she went to everyone, looking for support. Apparently, she didn't get it. I wasn't too surprised when I came home the next day and saw that her things were gone. There was a note on the kitchen table. You were right. We are too far apart to be together again. I'm sorry things turned out this way. I thought we had the perfect life. I talked to the band yesterday and they all agreed that if you're leaving, I'm leaving. They're still angry about me leaving the band, and although they didn't say it outright, they don't trust me anymore. I've taken exactly half of the money from our accounts. I have no desire to cheat you out of anything, except our marriage, I thought. And I know the house belonged to you before we were married, so it's yours. I'd ask you to let me take some of the furniture when I rent, as well as some memorabilia I didn't have room for today. I'll always love you. Who knows? Maybe someday, eh? I won't count on it, but it's a nice fantasy. Claire. The group arrived on Wednesday. They had called ahead to make arrangements. They were still my friends, and none of this trouble was their doing, except for the obvious ones, so I accepted them. We talked for a while and each expressed their regrets. Jeff said he'd bring the tools back by the weekend. Why? You're still welcome anytime, all of you, just as friends without benefits. I think that put them all at ease. We ended up cooking a meal together, and Amber sat down at the table with me. Can I go home now? Yes, you can. But we won't sleep together. I'm still in the process. I thought so, but I want to be in my own bed. If you need me, call me, even if it's just a snuggle. She stayed another 4 months and we had nothing. Oddly enough, I felt like I'd be cheating if I slept with someone before I was completely divorced. Amber found a nice apartment and decided she would be happy there. Jeff and Mark came over to help her move her bedroom. Her only regret was having to part with the dresser that Jeff had made for her. It was too big to fit in the apartment. I made her promise that as soon as she found a bigger apartment, or got married, or even lived with someone, we would make sure she got it. I got my divorce certificate 5 months later. It was very civilized. No yelling, no drama, no fights over property. Just sign here, sign here, sign here, sign here, sign here. Congratulations, you are divorced. The group, of course, sent her out, and I wondered what she was doing. But then I remembered how beautiful she was and how she was goofing around even before the divorce, so I doubt she lacked male companionship. Or female companionship, for that matter. Mark and Kathy divorced a year later for reasons unknown, at least to me. One day I asked Jeff if he'd found anyone else to connect with, or if they were now alone in forced monogamy. He grinned. It's not as small a town as you think. Heather and I are with 2 couples right now, and another has shown interest in our lifestyle. We're proceeding very slowly and cautiously, but things are looking promising. Well, good for them. Everyone deserves happiness and fulfillment, no matter what path they choose. When Mark left, Jeff and I bought out his share of the boat. He and I had a fishing trip planned one morning, and he called to see if he could take a couple friends with him. I knew they were part of his new group and didn't mind. Bill and Fred were good guys, but couldn't fish worth a damn. I took Bill and Jeff took Fred, we gave them the Fishing 101 textbook, and by noon they were on their feet. Jeff told them a little about my history, and they took a hint. But I told them I had left that lifestyle behind, and besides, I didn't have a partner. From the way Fred looked at me, I sensed he was willing to make an exception. They became fishing buddies and then came to the farm, if you could call the 15 acres that remained of the original property a farm. I was inclined to think it was a very large lawn with a few trees. My cousins owned about 60 acres or so behind the farm and lived out of state, so I pretty much owned the place. I owned the barn but not the pastures behind it, but I could use them if I wanted to. I never wanted to until Fred begged me to let him put his horses there, agreeing to pay the rent. He had 4 of them, and I thought it would be a good idea to keep the pastures under grazing so they wouldn't turn into brush. I told him he could do it, and I wouldn't charge him any money, but I wouldn't take care of them. Fred arrived with 2 horse trailers and a flatbed full of hay. He brought his family with him, and they all took on the job of storing feed and setting up the horses together. The rest of their group came too, and I got to know everyone. Besides Jeff and Kathy, Fred and Bill's wives were there, as well as another couple who had joined them about 4 months ago. They turned out to be nice people, and we got along quite well. The ladies went to the local supermarket, and I fired up the brick barbecue that my grandfather had built 60 years ago just for such occasions. There was alcohol, but they didn't drink much, and as the day drew to a close, we all loitered around. Fred's wife Sarah happened to be next to me, and after some small talk asked if I knew Claire Wilson. I was married to a woman named Claire, but it only lasted 6 years. As far as I know, she moved away. Did you know why? Not really. I didn't even know she'd moved until someone told me about it. If it's the same person, and I think it is, would you want to know why she moved? Not if it would drive me into depression. I hope she's doing well, even though we've gone our separate ways. After all, there was no hate there. At least on my end, we just reached a fork in the road and she went left, and I went right. After you, she remarried, and she and her new husband were part of the group I was in. They didn't last a year before they disappeared. They weren't like us. Things got out of hand when they gave us a little gift, if you know what I mean. It wasn't particularly nasty and was easily cured with a couple drinks, but because of what we had to go through, we voted them out. They didn't take it very well. After that, the band broke up. A few months later, we met Jeff and Kathy, and they brought Bill and Martha. We've been together now for 18 months. Stan and Chloe are our newbies. Tell me, do you ever get bored? Believe it or not, I miss it sometimes. Although it's been great for the most part, the feeling of being part of a close-knit group of people who you know have your back. You guys seem to have that, and I'm happy for you. It's just not for me anymore. She grinned. Well, if you ever change your mind, I have a sister. You'll be the first person I call. As they left that night, She gave me some more information. I have to tell you something else about Claire. I wasn't sure until I found out what kind of guy you seem to be. Claire and her husband joined a group. A big group. Things got out of hand when a new woman showed up, without her husband. He wasn't happy when he caught her and burned the group to the ground. He had pictures and recordings that he put on the internet. There were some pretty powerful people in the band, and when they were exposed, it cost the couple their careers. Claire's new husband was the one who brought her into the band, and they became very uncomfortable. The pressure became so intense that they divorced. You should know that Claire came home. I have spoken to her, and she is in intensive therapy, private sessions, and group sessions. Her condition seems to be improving. Just thought you should know in case you see her. I thought about it as they left. Claire was obsessed with having fun. I checked her out and the profile matched. I don't know if it can be cured, but I wished her the best. Next chapter. Amber came to me with the same news. We kept in touch, and one day she called me wanting to ask me an important question. Would I walk her down the aisle? She looked amazing in her dress. Her husband seemed like a nice guy and was totally devoted to her. They had a baby girl shortly after their wedding, and she was a sweet, well-behaved child. One day they came over so she could show him her closet and see if it would fit in her house. We measured it, and from the way he talked, I doubted it would fit. The little one saw the horses and had a fit, so I carried her downstairs, and when they piled up against the fence, she clung to me very tightly. I think when she realized they weren't going to eat her, she relaxed and rubbed her nose against theirs and giggled. I took her out to the pasture and put her on the back of Molly, an old mare with the gentlest disposition I've ever seen in an animal. I made her walk a few steps while she giggled. When we got outside, Amber did her best to frown. Now, all I'm going to hear is that she wants a horse. Well, I have plenty of pasture. Her husband Bob laughed and said, They'll be back to me in 8 or 10 years. When little Belle went to bed, she told me about meeting Claire. I almost didn't recognize her, Jake. She must have gained 30 pounds, and it didn't look good on her. I invited her into the house and we had coffee while she played with Belle. You know, if we'd stuck to the plan, I'd be almost as old now, she said. She asked if I kept in touch with everyone, and I said I saw Jeff and Kathy from time to time. I had no idea where Mark and Heather were. She asked if I see you, and I said we are still close, that you walked me down the aisle and were the godfather of my child. Tears came to her eyes when I told her that you were doing well and that she should come and visit you. She wasn't sure if she would be accepted. I don't know if she was fishing or not, but I told her she should call you and gave her your new number. Have you heard from her? No, but she has no reason to be afraid. I don't hate her, though I hate what she's become. But that's water under the bridge now. I have no intention of having relations with her again, but I can tolerate her in society. If you see her again, tell her to stop by. Be sure to give her my words. I don't want her to come with expectations. 3 weeks later, they returned and Claire was with them. Amber was right, although before they arrived, she told me she had lost a little weight and smiled more. But there were still a lot of wrinkles around her eyes. I carried Belle into the barn, and she ached when she saw the little pony. Amber didn't know whether to smirk or complain. I wasn't looking for a pony, if that's what you're thinking. Jeff had a friend who was moving out of state and had to get rid of his horses. He called me to see if he could bring them here and give him a chance to find a place to put them. He had moved to New York City, and after learning that it cost almost as much to keep a horse as it did to rent an apartment, he asked Fred to find them a good home. A white mare and a gray gelding are a new addition. Do you want a horse? Claire stroked the white mare, and I saw her first smile since she'd gotten here. Amber and Bob carried Belle into the house and left us alone. Why haven't you gotten married yet? Haven't found anyone I want to marry yet. How about you? I heard you and your new husband split up. I'm sorry to hear that. Have you dated anyone since the move? No. I think I'm going to stay away from relationships for a while until I come to my senses. I know Amber told you I'm seeing a counselor and that I'm getting help. It's weird that a woman who wanted to have fun with almost everyone is now celibate. I stay away from bars and compromising situations because I know how easy it would be to snap back. The excitement of meeting someone new is as strong as an alcoholic craving a drink. She was silent for a second, and when we came to our senses, she asked me the question I knew I had to ask. Jake, do you think we could spend time together again? Just so you know, if we do, you won't get any, at least not for a while. I waited a minute. That's not a good idea, Claire. There's too much baggage. I don't think we can overcome the ghosts of the past, and I don't see a good ending. A small tear rolled down her cheek, but she smiled. I thought so too, but I had to ask. One more thing. Since you seem to have extra horses, can I come and ride sometimes? I rode the trails when we moved, and I really liked it. Take the white mare. She's well trained and has a good temperament. I lay in my empty bed that night and thought about it, remembering the times we had spent together. Next chapter. She surprised me by coming out the next week. I didn't even know she was there until I saw her car outside the barn. She drove around for about an hour and then drove off. A couple weeks later, if I wasn't busy, I would saddle up Gray and ride with her. The Gray was skittish when he first arrived. Jeff said his friend had him for a short time, and he was very poorly trained. I read books, watched training videos on YouTube, and made it my project. I made mistakes but learned from them, and pretty soon we became buddies. He still had a hard time letting anyone ride him, so most people left him alone. We talked more during those rides than we had during our entire marriage. We would never become lovers again, but we became very good friends. One day, she went out with another woman. She was a little older and kept a stiff attitude with me, but after watching us chat, she relaxed. Her name was Polly, and a month after we met, she came to me alone. I want to talk to you about something. Claire and I have started to have feelings for each other. Do you think it could go anywhere? I think you're asking her, not me. I know she likes you a lot. Do you know her history? Most of it. She says she's changed. The question is, do you think she's changed, and are you willing to take a chance and find out? I think so, and I'm willing to put enough into myself to find out. Believe it or not, that's not why I came out here. How many booths do you have available? Can I rent one? I know we can ride yours, and you gave Claire's mare away, but I need my own. If you agree, will you help me find one? I thought for a moment. My house and lot 75 years ago were part of a huge dairy farm, and my barn was just huge. A local historian came to see me once and said it was the largest in the county. An empty stall shouldn't have been a problem. No, but only because I'm not the expert you need. Let me introduce you to my buddy, Jeff. I called Jeff and explained the situation. He didn't know whether to laugh or lose his temper. Let me get this straight. You want me to find your ex-wife's lover a horse that she can keep in your barn so they can come over and ride? You're a tough dude, bro. Count me in. Jeff and Kathy met Polly and found common ground. Pretty soon they became part of our group, but only socially. Everyone would almost always gather at my house on Saturday mornings to clean the stalls and ride a bit, then disperse to their respective homes. Amber and Bob would come over every now and then, and the ladies would drool over Bella. I guess it triggered their nesting instinct because 6 months later, Katie and Holly got pregnant. I was dating a woman I really liked, and she would sometimes come over when they were there. We didn't say anything to her about the dynamics of the group, but she didn't seem to like anyone, especially Claire and Amber. What bothered me was that the horses didn't like her, including Molly, and everyone liked this old lady. We lasted about 4 months, after which we decided our life goals didn't align and went our separate ways. By then, Bella was 4 years old and had her own saddle. I absolutely refused to let her get on the saddle unless she wore the helmet I had given her, along with a neck protector. Bob had his eye on one of those equestrian airbags, but couldn't find one small enough. We let her ride with us if we were going slow. One of us always had a rope for emergencies. She almost always fell asleep in front of someone halfway through the ride, usually me. If it wasn't me, it was Polly, which surprised her unspeakably. Now, on the nightstand next to their bed is a picture of Belle, Claire, and Polly cuddled up in a hammock. The kid has enough aunts and uncles to put together a team for almost any sport. Fast forward 12 years. I was sitting in the grandstand with my wife watching our child compete in her equestrian events. In fact, they were all her favorites. The only thing I didn't like was the jumping, especially in the steeplechase. She might have been 17, but she had inherited her mother's slight stature, and the thought of tons of horseflesh rumbling around her while she jumped scared the hell out of me. When she finished the competition, she came out to the bleachers to cheer on her 11-year-old sister. She hugged Amber and then jumped into my lap and gave me a big kiss. I think I performed pretty well, Daddy. I think so too, Belle. Let's hope the judges think so too. So how did it happen? About a year after everyone started riding, Amber came to me and said she thought Bob was acting a little strange. There was no way she could figure out what was wrong. I tried to assure her that it was nothing, but I promised I would talk to him. She left, and I went down to the barn. I had gotten into the habit of checking on them at night after a stray dog had followed them. He died prematurely at 12-gauge muzzle, but I still kept my guard up. Do you ever feel like you're being followed? The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and my own dog, a Pyrenean that I got to watch the horses, seemed tense. I went back into the house, grabbed my shotgun, went out the front door, and slipped away from the barn. Halfway down the driveway, I came across two cars and recognized them immediately. My blood pressure rose, and I decided to just wait by their cars. 30 minutes later, they came down the driveway giggling and holding hands. They kissed hard by their cars and were about to go in different directions when I spoke up from the darkness. "Bob, Haley, nice night, huh?" Haley shouted. She was Lester's wife, the latest addition to their group. I thought they were getting too bulky, but it was none of my business. Each new addition increased the chances of them being cracked. Jeff's wife was a school teacher, and Bill's wife was a nurse, and they really couldn't let their private affairs become public. Lester was a police officer, a shift sergeant in the state police. He was on an upward trajectory, and something like this could ruin his career. Haley started babbling something, and Bob kept quiet. I let her babble for a bit before I stopped her. You know you guys are on the verge of ruining a lot of lives, right? If this gets out, the whole group is in danger. Bob, you're an asshole. Amber doesn't deserve this. How could you do this to her? It's her own fault. I tried for almost a year to get her to join the group. She said she's already been there and done that and doesn't want to do it again. Even if she doesn't need the experience, I do. She's just being selfish. You're full of shit, no doubt about it. Are you willing to risk your family for this? Trust me, when Amber finds out, she'll dump your ass in a second. Is that really what you want? Maybe we should break up. I'm ready to expand my horizons, and if she's not with us, I'll find someone else. I hit him. He didn't notice in the dark, so I punched him right in the jaw. He dropped like a stone. Haley screamed again. Maybe we shouldn't make so much noise. Someone might come over and see what's going on. There wouldn't be anyone. I was at the end of a long driveway, and I had no neighbors, but she didn't know that. That silenced her immediately. Go home, Haley. Go home and think about what you've done. It's bad enough in a normal marriage, but in your case it's much worse. You didn't just betray your husband today. You betrayed 4 people. What do you think Lester will do if he finds out? If I even suspect you're doing it again, I'll destroy your world. Do you understand? That's it. Nothing more. Say it. Not anymore, Jake. I promise. Your promises don't carry much weight right now. One more thing. Was it the first time? Don't lie. She admitted it was the 5th time, 3 of them in the barn. Then, as she left, she sprinkled gravel on Bob. As for Bob, I left him to lie. Let him tell Amber some story about how he'd been wronged. Maybe she'll see right through him. I meant what I told her all those years ago. She was the best of us. I was glad at least one of us had found our happiness, and now it was a lie. Amber called me the next day with bad news. Bob had been mugged outside the sports bar where he was watching the game. He'd been doing that a lot lately, saying he knew how much she hated baseball and didn't want to hurt her. He had a big screen TV in his man cave, but Amber let him go, figuring it was good for him to go out with his friends once in a while. How badly is he hurt? Do the police have any suspects? He didn't call the police. When he came to, they were gone, and he had no idea what they looked like. Something must have spooked them because they didn't even take his wallet. He got a bunch of scratches and a swollen jaw. I told him he has to watch the next game at home. Sounds like a good plan. Keep an eye on him just in case. He could have a concussion or something. I tried to talk him into going to the hospital, but you know how stubborn he is. I know. Maybe this will be a wake-up call for him. What does that mean? It means he needs to prioritize. What would happen to you and Belle if he was killed? He wouldn't be killed. Besides, we have you. You'll take care of us. I will take care, and you know it. Let's not let that happen. Tell him what I said. He has something to live for. Thanks, Jake. Love you. Love you too, baby. I'll see you soon. I pondered this, and everyone noticed it. The only time I truly smiled was when Belle was climbing all over me. Katie put what everyone was thinking into words. Jesus, Jake, you act like someone ran over your dog. What's the matter with you? Never mind that. You have a date on Saturday. She's my cousin, and she doesn't know about our lifestyle. She just moved here, and she's staying with us until she finds a place. Ask her out, buy her wine and dine, maybe you'll get lucky. If you ask her out, I know we will. See if you can talk her into staying. She grinned. Don't think it's a sacrifice. The girl's hot. I had nothing else to do, so I asked her out and surprisingly had a good time. She stayed the night and we went out a few more times until we realized the spark just wasn't there. Amber took great offense to me. Why can't you find a nice girl? I kissed her. I found one, but she's married to someone else. She grinned and poked me with her finger. That ship has sailed. You had your chance. It took me a long time to get over you. We'll keep looking, won't we, Bob? He didn't look me in the eye as he answered. You got it, baby. The sooner we get him married, the sooner I can stop worrying about the two of you. She giggled, but if looks could kill, she'd be a widow in no time. It was bound to happen. Nature, karma, stupidity, they all probably played a part. They slipped into the barn again because they knew I had a date and spent 2 hours together. They got dressed, made themselves as presentable as possible, and left. She slipped out first and he waited 10 minutes and, grinning, got in the car. As he pulled onto the road, he began to ponder if he could seduce his secretary. The signals were coming in, and he was more than happy to take them. Bob was figuring out how hard it would be to talk his secretary into having some fun, and he already knew that Haley was up for it. The police lights came on behind him, and he pulled off the road like a good citizen, wondering what had caused them to pull him over. Maybe his taillight had burned out? He thought it was odd that they ordered him to stick his hands out of the car, but he did. The policeman came over and pointed the flashlight in Bob's face. Could you shine the light in my eyes? I can't see. Certainly, sir. His eyes, still blinded by the flashlight beam, didn't see the stun gun. The tension hit him hard, and he lost control of his bladder. Humiliation was the least of his worries because he was dragged out of the car and began to be manhandled with an aspid, a curved piece of very flexible metal covered in leather. Bob could hear his bones crunching as the man worked him over professionally, knowing where to strike to cause maximum pain. Finally, his hair was pulled, and he nearly passed out from the shock, oblivious to the pain. Sergeant Lester lowered his face to Bob's face and in a very controlled voice told him how bad his choices had been lately. The man laughed as he let go of Bob's head and it bounced off the sidewalk. Then a gun flashed in his hand and landed right on his balls, severing one of them. He immediately lost consciousness. He didn't know how long he lay there. The road was sparsely traveled, especially at night, but finally someone showed up. A local sheriff's deputy took one look at him and called an ambulance. The ambulance driver was shocked by what he saw. He had been to Afghanistan and had seen firsthand the interrogation of prisoners there, so he knew this man had been worked over by a professional. His left arm was broken, and 2 fingers on his right hand were shattered. His right elbow was shattered. His left leg was broken as well as his right ankle. Whoever had done this knew how to deliver pain. Strangely, whoever had done it hadn't touched his face, though one eye was swollen shut and the imprint of the glove was still on his face. When they saw the blood between his legs and cut his pants open, he nearly lost his dinner. This guy wouldn't be frolicking for a long time, if ever. He was taken to the hospital where they worked on him for 3 hours. He lost 1 testicle and a finger, but everything else was patched up. They also discovered an injury they hadn't noticed in the field because of his hair. Someone kicked him in the head. Hard. They put him in a coma until the brain swelling goes down, but they're not sure if the damage is permanent. They ID'd him from his wallet. Damn, the cop thought, going through the wallet and looking at the pictures of a pretty young woman and a little girl. He hoped the guy had good insurance. As dawn broke, the cops surveyed the scene, but there wasn't much to see. The only tire tracks on the side of the road belonged to the victim's car. With no evidence, the case was quickly hushed up, and when the man regained consciousness 40 days later, he said he didn't remember anything. The detective in charge of the investigation could have easily realized he was lying, but refused to change the story. This smelled like something personal to the detective. Maybe he was entertaining the wrong wife and she had a husband who took it seriously. Maybe he was dabbling in things he shouldn't be doing. That morning, Amber called me in a panic, crying uncontrollably and mumbling incoherently. I immediately left work and drove to the hospital. When I saw the condition Bob was in, I felt almost sick to my stomach. As time passed, it became clear that no one knew why he had been attacked, and when he finally woke up, he said he didn't remember anything. He had good insurance, and Amber made sure to pay it off every week to keep it active. Her finances were strained to the breaking point, so I evicted them from the apartment they were living in and took her and Belle home. I noticed that everyone in our social circle, except Haley, came around offering to help. One day I asked Jeff where she was, and he looked at me like he was weighing what he wanted to tell me. They're not here anymore. Lester got a promotion, and they went to the other side of the state. That told me everything I wanted to know. It took him almost a year to recover enough to work again. When they got back on their feet and found an apartment, Belle didn't want to leave. It took all of us to reassure her. I went back to my life, still not attached to her. The group quieted down for a while, but gradually regained their good spirits. One day I asked Kathy if they were going to audition someone else for the band, and she seemed wary. We're going to keep the band where it is. It'll be safer that way. The only bright spot in that dismal time was Claire and Polly's wedding. I walked them down the aisle and wondered if it would work out. I hoped so. They did seem happy. They had a plan. In 3 years, they were going to find a baby to adopt. They seemed to be looking forward to it and were constantly borrowing Belle to practice parenting. Amber came back to me 3 months later. Apparently, Haley was back in town and laid it all out for her the first time she saw Amber. Amber slapped her hard enough to knock her down and went to deal with Bob at work. That day quickly turned into a very lousy day because she stormed into his office and caught Bob and his secretary. Everyone on the floor heard yelling and screaming, and several people went to deal with it. One of them was the vice president, and Bob's day got a lot worse. Amber grabbed Belle and ran to me. I got them back to their old rooms. Bob's day was getting worse and worse. The VP was about to fire them both until the secretary reported predatory behavior that made her practically bulletproof, so Bob left and she stayed. He tried to apologize to Amber, but she wasn't in the mood for forgiveness. He finally snapped and said that if she would just go back to the way she was when we were together, there would be no problem. He gave her an ultimatum. Find a group to join or he would leave her. She laughed so hard she almost cried. How can you leave me? I've already left you in the dust, figuratively speaking. Good luck finding someone to take you on. Most groups have their own underground to report important things. By the end of the week, there won't be a group left in the state that hasn't heard of you. Besides, You usually need a partner to join a group, and you don't have one. I'm filing a statement of irreconcilable differences. Don't be a jerk. Sign the papers. He threatened to make a fuss, but Jeff's quiet words, speaking on behalf of the group, calmed him down. The divorce went through, but that didn't stop him from acting like a jerk. It got to the point where he tried to grab Belle and run away. I happened to catch him first. Let her go, kid. Stick to your visitation. If you run away with her, it'll violate the custody order, and when they catch you, they'll send you to jail. I still have Lester's sergeant's number. I bet if I called him and told him where you'd be doing your time, he could arrange for you to get a decent reception and a pleasant stay. The wind had gone out of his sails, and he just sat there crying while Belle ran into my arms. She loved him, but the beatings and the direction his life had taken had changed him, and she could feel it. He left town without leaving an address. I tracked him down before the wedding, offering to release him from child support if he gave up his parental rights. He tried to detain me, and I grinned. If you can't pay the arrears, chances are you'll spend some time in jail and the payments will only go up. I can probably get a judge to revoke your license if you get locked up for any length of time. Agree. He agreed. I tried to hate him for what he had done to his family, but all I felt was sadness for all of them. So what brought us to the altar? It started with Belle. She was having nightmares, running into my room and climbing into bed. I'd just cuddle her and fall asleep. The first time Amber saw us, she smiled, and by about the fourth, she decided she deserved to be touched too. They ended up in my bed about 4 nights out of 7. Nothing happened between us. She was still mourning her marriage, and I didn't have those feelings at the time. It took about 5 months before they calmed down enough to sleep in their cribs all night. I was self-employed and could set my own schedule, whereas Amber's was very rigid. I often had to make sure Belle got to school on time, make her breakfast, and pick her up in the afternoon. If something happened and I couldn't, one of our friends would do it, most often Claire or Polly, but usually both. It didn't work very well because they held her hostage until almost bedtime. Eventually, we had to make rules and stick to them. And I didn't realize I had been promoted until she went outside with her little friend to pick him up. It was warm and I rolled down the windows to listen. I heard the girls talking. Which one is your daddy? She pointed to my SUV. That one over there? I made a big show of getting out of the car, helped her into the seat, gave her a hug, and kissed her cheek. She giggled but hugged me back. I told Amber about what she had said, later that evening when she had already gone to bed. She only smiled and patted my arm. Next chapter. Belle could be pretty serious, and one day she came to me while I was in the barn. I knew Amber was watching her from the house. I lived in a quiet neighborhood, but I'd read enough horror stories to keep her on my radar. She climbed up on the stall wall and watched me check the wound the white mare had made somewhere. I've put an antibiotic on it, and if it doesn't improve by tomorrow, I'll have the vet come to me. Is she okay? I think so, baby. I just did the same thing to her that I did to you when you got scratched. Put some medicine on it and put a Band-Aid on it. I didn't know it, but Amber had gone down to the barn and we couldn't see her, but she could hear everything we said. Do you really like Mom? I really like your mommy. Very much. Can I ask you something? She looked as serious as possible for a 7-year-old. Go ahead, baby. I want to call you Daddy. My friends say you already are. If that's true, why can't I call you Daddy? Well, it sure was dusty in here. That's probably why my eyes started to water. You can call me Daddy if you want, sweetie. I'd love to be your daddy. But being a daddy is so much more than just being called that. It means I have to love and protect you until you grow up. I can handle that, but it requires that you love me back. Her face lit up with one of those beaming smiles I loved so much. Silly Daddy, I already love you. Does that mean you have to love Mommy too? Absolutely. Moms and dads who have sweet girls should love each other. It's the law. But I won't love her because I have to. I'll love her because I want to, for the rest of our lives. At that moment, we heard a sob and looked around. Amber was on her knees, tears streaming down her cheeks. Belle rushed to her, scared to death. "Mommy, are you okay?" When her voice came back to her, she said that she wasn't just fine, she was very happy. "Why are you crying since you're happy?" "It's grown-up girls, honey. You'll understand someday. Don't you want to spend the night with Aunt Claire and Aunt Polly?" "Yep. Why?" "So Mommy can do big girl stuff with Daddy, okay?" "Okay." On the way back, after we dropped Belle off, she went ring shopping. We went to 5 different stores, from large chains to a few small independents, before she found what she needed. Fate must have been with us because the ring was the right size and she wore it right out of the store. I asked her to marry me in the barn, not the most romantic place, but I got down on the floor next to her and asked anyway, with Belle as our only witness. Belle told Polly and Claire what had happened, and they smoked the phone lines. By 7, the party was in full swing. Jeff was working the grill with me and grinned. "What?" "Nothing. I'm happy for you. I've got some good news too. Katie's pregnant, 3 months pregnant." "That's good. Learn all you can, and in a couple years you'll be able to guide me." This started a trend, and over the next 4 months 2 other ladies became pregnant. They all agreed and only slept with their husbands until they were sure they were having a baby. Jeff also told me that no woman should have children that are not their husbands. They all agreed. The first child wasn't any of theirs because Claire and Polly adopted a 4-week-old boy. They were qualified within 18 months, which they said was pretty quick for the system. They told the boys that we had to teach them how to fish, ride, and everything else a little boy should be able to do. Amber decided I was getting a little old and didn't waste any time throwing out her birth control the same day I gave her the ring. She must have been physically fit because another girl, Jessica, was born, followed 2 years later by a boy, Jake Jr. Besides Claire and the band, we had many other friends, but we rarely mixed. 20 years later, we were at the barn watching my daughter Belle introduce her son to horses. He giggled and reached for them just like she did, so I think he'll be fine. We got on the horse and I ended up next to Jeff, with a small gap between us and the other riders. We shared memories and general topics, and I asked him if he thought he would have his lifestyle when he was in his 70s. "Absolutely. There hasn't been a new couple in our group in 16 years, and I think we'll be together until the day we die." Change is coming, Jake. People are already becoming more relaxed. I suspect that in another 20 years it will be quite common, and marriages with multiple partners will be legal. You really think so? Think about it. I was thinking about it as we drove, and I was reminiscing. If Claire hadn't cheated on me outside the group, would I have stayed in it? No, I would have left eventually. When Claire said it was the end of her affair, it sparked something in me. However you explain it, it made me feel like I was in one drawn-out affair, fooling myself more than others, and not having the life I wanted. So I ended the affair and lived my life, and I regret nothing. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.